So let's consider some of the physiological events that are happening during the process of wound healing. And the stages in wound healing are the same, whether a wound is healing by primary intention or secondary intention. The stages are the same, it's just a matter of the scale that's different. And people classify the stages of wound healing in different ways. But first of all, let's try and run through and get a feel for the events that's happening. So here we have a wound. And any wound that penetrates into the dermis or below is going to cause hemorrhage. So one of the first things you're going to get is bleeding into the wound. So we'll get bleeding into the wound. There will be coagulation. The blood's going to clot. So the wound is initially going to fill with blood clot. And that's the same whether it's a small wound that can heal by primary intention or a larger wound that's going to need to heal by secondary intention. It just means you'll get a thinner layer of blood if it's primary intention. So here we have a wound filling with blood, and this blood's going to clot fairly quickly. And one of the first things that we're going to see is that the blood on top is going to dry and form a scab. So we're going to get the blood on the top drying, forming a scab. So now we've got drier blood on top and we've got blood filling the wound cavity. Now when the tissue is injured, that's going to release inflammatory cytokines from damaged tissue cells. And as well as that, in the blood there's going to be large cells called monocytes, and these can also release inflammatory mediators. And indeed there's going to be monocytes. Actually they're not monocytes, are they? What do we call a monocyte when it's in the tissue spaces? If we have this cell in the tissue spaces here. If monocytes are in the tissue spaces, they're called macrophages. So around about the edge of the wound, the macrophages become aware that there is an inflammatory insult going on, and they too will release cytokines. So we get the release of cytokines and inflammatory mediators. And of course the inflammatory mediators bring about the process of inflammation. There's going to be inflammatory changes here. And we've seen on the inflammation talk how essential this first stage is for healing. Inflammation is the first stage of the healing process, and it's absolutely an essential stage of the healing process. We can't skip it. There has to be a phase of inflammation initiating the healing process. So the cytokines and the inflammatory mediators, one of the first things they're going to do is attract lots of neutrophils from the blood. So we're going to get infiltration of the wound with neutrophils. Neutrophils are granulocytic polymorphonucleocytes, and they're going to be attracted into the area of inflammation and into the wound fairly quickly. So within about an hour to 2 hours, around about 90 minutes, we're going to get quite large numbers of granulocytic neutrophils in the wound. This is good, because in the wound there's probably going to be bacteria. And of course the neutrophils are phagocytic. They can eat and digest these bacteria, reducing the risk of infection. Also, because of the trauma, there's going to be dead tissue cells. And we don't want to leave dead necrotic tissue lying around in a wound, because it forms an excellent bacterial habitat. The bacteria can get in there, they can live in there, they can eat the dead tissue cells. It's their bacterial nutrient substrate, and they can multiply, causing infection. So it's good that the neutrophils get in there really quite quickly. These are the emergency response It's kind of a quick reaction force, isn't it? The neutrophils are the QRF of the body, the quick reaction force. Get in there, start eating the bacteria, start eating the dead tissue cells. Excellent, that's good. And the neutrophils are also going to release some cytokines as well. And one of the things that these cytokines do within 24-48 hours is into the wound, it's going to attract a lot more of these large neutrophils. So more neutrophils are going to be attracted, more macrophages are going to be attracted into the wound. So the neutrophils are releasing the cytokines, attracting lots of monocytes, which become macrophages in the wound and in the tissues. And the macrophages are absolutely vital. Not only are macrophages the ultimate phagocytosers, they'll eat the damaged tissue and any residual bacteria, but the macrophages also release growth factors. Now, growth factors are a type of cytokine that are going to stimulate the release of regeneration